I look at people and I wonder all day, who are you and you are not the one in your way. And then I think about myself and I state, I'm a pretty boss with all my shit bright white. I'm a freak in the sheets, but I got class. I'ma grab an ass if you want it. Best you ever had, give it to you, man. Ooh.
Mag, one of the starter frames, a caster, debuffer, crowd control and damage frame. She can armor strip, shield tank, shield gate, crowd control, group enemies, deal massive single target damage, massive AoE damage, create bubble blenders of death, and I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's simplify this. This is Mag, and this is the build I'm using in the base Steel Path gameplay you are seeing. This is the build on the weapon I'm using to shred these Steel Path mobs. The weapon in question is the Penta, a really mediocre weapon that you can pick up from the market at Mastery rank 6, but is killing our boy Vor here quite nicely. Typically you would get absolutely rinsed if you tried to use a setup like this on Steel Path, but Mag has some special interactions that we can take advantage of to make the most out of a bad build. Welcome to this introduction to Mag. This video is tailored towards new players to show that you can do Steel Path most of the time with basic builds, and to also highlight how to play to Mag's strengths. As with my previous video, I will show more invested builds towards the end. First, just a quick dive into Mag's abilities. I'm not going to spend too much time here, as it's really not necessary. Pull. Mag pulls mobs within a 90-degree angle in front of her, grouping them together nicely while also ragdolling them. This ability is affected by efficiency, range, and power strength. Magnetize. I will come back to this ability last, as there is a lot to talk about here. Polarize sends out a pulse of magnetic energy that strips enemy defenses such as shield and armor, while also restoring the shields of Mag and any allies the pulse touches. Polarize also leaves debris called Polarize shards. When close, these shards are picked up and orbit Mag, inflicting slash damage upon enemies they come in contact with. You can also use Mag's pull ability to suck these polarized shards to you from a distance. Polarized shards have a powerful synergy with Magnetize, more on that later. When enemies are hit by this ability, it also causes a small AoE explosion of magnetic damage. The initial range of the cast is affected by range mods, while how long the pulse travels outwards is affected by duration. Efficiency affects the cost of casting the ability, power strength affects the amount of defenses stripped from enemies, shields restored to Mag and allies, and overall damage of the ability. This is also a one-handed ability, which means you can do things like reload while casting it. Crush. Mag picks up enemies in a radius, inflicting 3 instances of magnetic damage and leaving them knocked down after the cast. This ability restores shields to Mag and her allies per tick of damage inflicted upon enemies. It has a really long cast time and can leave Mag vulnerable. Efficiency is efficiency, range affects range, power strength affects the damage done, and shields restored per tick of damage. Let's go back to Magnetize now. This ability does a lot of things and has a lot of synergies, but I'm just going to strip it down as much as possible. I will leave the wiki link in the description if you want to read every little detail. This ability has 2 parts to it. The defensive part is whatever. It could be good in a pinch, but can't protect you from melee or AoE abilities and greatly hinders your mobility. The actual ability places a magnetic bubble around the enemy you cast it upon, grounding them in place, applying a huge damage multiplier to that enemy and redirecting any projectile and hit scan weapons, as well as polarized shards towards the center of the bubble. Only the target you cast Magnetize on is affected by the damage multiplier. The bubble also pulls in enemies within a radius. The bubble itself will also absorb 25% of the damage from all redirected projectiles, bullets, and polarized shards, and deal that damage over time as magnetic damage. If the original target you cast Magnetize on dies, which it likely will, the Magnetize bubble will explode at the end of its duration, causing a big boom. The original target dying also causes the radial suck to stop sucking. The damage from the explosion can reach into the millions even with negative power strength. This is simply done by pumping in as much damage as you can into the bubble. Think of it as an explosive sponge of doom. A few bullets pumped in isn't going to cause much pain, but if you were to mag dump, pun intended, then the damage absorbed is far greater, and so the explosion is more gloriously destructive. The damage multiplier and explosion damage is affected by strength mods. Range mods affect the bubble size, pull radius, and explosion radius. Duration is duration, efficiency reduces the cost of the ability. But wait, there's more. This ability has unique interactions with projectiles, especially projectiles with punch through. Polarized shards, for example, these shards are drawn to the center of the magnetized bubble, where they zip around shredding most poor souls that are unfortunate enough to exist on the same timeline as Mag. This creates a damage blender in the middle of the bubble, and it's usually enough to just cast Mag's Magnetize and Polarize together to kill most things. Now, this crappy penta I'm using fires manually detonated grenades. The grenades themselves are projectiles and have infinite punch through, as they only expire once they explode, and that only happens if you manually do so. So, when you fire a few of these into Mag's bubble, you get a blender of penta grenades bonking enemies over and over again, and it makes a funny sound. Overall, if you combine a good projectile weapon with polarized shards and constant inputs of damage from multiple sources, then you get a bubble explosion of a couple of million. Weapons that work well with Mag's Polarize include, but are not limited to, the Tenet Archiplasma, the Penta weapons, the Lanka, the Mitre, Natarut, and my personal favourite, the Exegesis. With that out of the way, Mag is a fairly squishy frame and does rely quite heavily on her abilities to stay alive. I would recommend focusing on energy economy as much as possible. With that in mind, I'm using the Zenuric Focus School. For weapons, I'm using the Penta I've showcased in the gameplay, nothing to it, and I wouldn't use this normally. Just remember the synergy with Mag's bubble, and you will have to periodically detonate the grenades to launch new ones, as there is a limit to how many live grenades you can have out at the same time. Then I'm using the Atomos, which is a decent enough weapon, although I'm not really using it all that often in the gameplay. It could be used for a bit of priming. The Atomos blueprint can be purchased for credits from the market. For the melee, I'm using the Broken War, which is a very good melee weapon, which comes with its own weapon slot and pre-installed catalyst for absolutely free by simply completing the Second Dream quest. The Sentinel can also be a big help when equipped with mods that support your warframe shield restoration. Mods like Guardian and Shield Recharge are very helpful for Mag. Now here we are in Steel Path, getting the job done, but what about the Acolyte? Not bad at all for a setup with 0 arcanes, 0 galvanized mods, 0 augments, and was basically cobbled together in 5 minutes and held up by duct tape. Here are some general tips to play Mag and stay alive. Keep your energy up and keep casting. I've already mentioned it already, but as with a lot of frames, if you run out of juice, you're dead. I feel this is especially true with squishy caster frames such as Mag. Keep casting your abilities to keep your shields up. Position yourself effectively within Mag's bubble. All projectiles, bullets, and such are redirected towards the center of the bubble. That means you can use the bubble to block incoming damage and stay alive. Range is your friend here, as you can then cast bigger bubbles for comfier protection. You do have to watch out for melee units and AoE effects from Eximus, however. Speaking of, prioritize high-value targets such as Acolytes and Eximus units for Magnetize. This really makes good use of that damage multiplier and can help take out some of the more dangerous units in the game. Be aware that some special enemies like Acolytes and bosses such as Vor have a diminishing effect on the duration of Magnetize the more you cast it upon them. So if you're wondering why your bubble is only lasting a second or two on those enemies, then that's why. Use pull to drag further out enemies into the blast radius of your Magnetize bubble, while also providing some crowd control and grouping for either priming or melee bashing. Unfortunately, I got tagged by the Acolytes, but overall I'm happy with the showcase. Now perhaps you have a bit more pep in your arsenal, some better mods, and some augments. With a build like this, we look at improving upon what we had with better energy economy and the augments Magnetized Discharge and Fracturing Crush. Fleeting Expertise is a corrupted mod that drops from Orokin Vaults on Deimos. This gives us a big increase of energy efficiency at the cost of duration. We are using continuity to offset that negative duration, a little bit, as you do want some duration on your magnetized bubble. Now we do have Umbral Intensify here, which you acquire from the quest The Sacrifice. Fracturing Crush allows us to armor strip with Mag's 4th ability, as long as we have 134% power strength. Umbral Intensify is nice for getting that, but if this mod is too expensive or you simply don't have it, you could slot Normal Intensify and Power Drift if you have it, or even Corrosive Projection, which then lowers the power strength requirement for a full strip to 110%. You could also use Intensify and get any rank of Molt Augmented. After a few kills, it will get you up to that 134% easy. Plenty of ways to get that. Keeping on the subject of Fracturing Crush, as mentioned, this augment strips enemy armor permanently, which is mainly what we are using it for. It also roots enemies in place, which is okay, but more importantly, it speeds up the very slow and clunky casting of the ability. I also have to apologize, as I do have 2 casting speed Archon shards on my mag, so the cast speed you are seeing is a little bit misleading. However, if you do have access to Archon shards, the casting speed is very appreciated on mag. Magnetized Discharge increases the range of your magnetized bubble, allows you to manually detonate the bubble, and has a chance of disarming enemies in the blast radius, with the disarm chance being affected by power strength. I personally really like this mod just for the range increase alone, but you could swap it out for something else if you prefer. However, the additional range of Mag's bubble feels very comfy to use. Mag's augments can be picked up for 25,000 standing from the Parent Sequence or New Loca. Alternatively, you can trade with other players to pick them up for around 10 to 15 platinum. I've also swapped out the primary weapon here for the Lanka, which can be acquired from the Energy Lab in your dojo. This weapon has innate infinite body punch through and works very well with Magnetize. However, the projectile can dissipate quickly, and I believe that's due to the projectile having a 5 meter punch through of surfaces. So even with infinite body punch through, the projectile will disappear once it's passed through the geometry multiple times. Just be mindful when in tight spaces. Having a pretty good time here in Steel Path with this mid setup. How does it fare against Acolytes? Pretty good. Finally, what if we had all the shiny things? Moving into a more advanced build, I've opted for a shield tank setup with primed redirection, adaptation and arcane aegis, along with rolling guard for some iframes and status cleanse. For energy sustain, we're using primed flow and equilibrium in combination with our sentinel using synth deconstruct. Other than that, we have the 2 augments previously mentioned, stretch and Molt Augmented, to give us power strength as we rack up kills. The aura can be really whatever you want. Energy siphon, enemy radar, holster amp, use whatever you want and build around your own preferences. Here is the Exegesis build, using shotgun cannonade for damage and punch through. I love this weapon with Mag. The gas works very well at creating an even deadlier singularity in Mag's bubble. If you don't like Bane mods, I know I'm not too keen on them either, then swap it for Serration or another element, whatever you want. You can buy the blueprint for this weapon at the market and use it at Mastery rank 8. The secondary is the Cyanex, not the best weapon on its own, but definitely unique and effective with Mag. Again, you can swap out the Bane if you don't like it. You could also mod in some punch through if you want, or even set up the weapon as a primer. I like this build as we are getting gas, viral and heat. Again, mod to your preferences. This weapon can be researched at the Energy Lab in your dojo and used at Mastery rank 8. Here's the Sentinel setup. We're using the Diriger for priming and equipping it with the Hellstrom. This is important because we are using Manifold Bond, which takes the status effects from our Sentinel weapon and applies them directly to the Sentinel abilities. In this case, that would be Arc Coil. You know, that zappy attack the Sentinel does. The Hellstrom is very good for this, as it has 3 potential status effects it can apply, and in this build, it has 5. On top of that, the Hellstrom is a great primer on its own. Manifold Bond also reduces the cooldown of Sentinel abilities, including Arc Coil, when we kill enemies affected by 3 or more status effects. I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. To further the status spreading, we are using Duplex Bond, which creates a clone of your Sentinel for every 100 energy spent. You can have up to 3 clones, and they use the mods on your Sentinel weapon. Hellstrom and Arc Coil spread status effects like crazy. We kill the enemies affected by 3 status effects or more, and Arc Coil basically has little to no cooldown. It's a nice loop of status priming. On the Hellstrom, we have Viral and Radiation modded on, primed Firestorm for a larger area of effect, and these Vigilante mods, while not overly useful for this build, are great for running good critical primaries, and I'm also too lazy to switch the builds. Lots of priming, lots of damage, lots of big juicy booms, much like Conception. I feel Mag is a somewhat underappreciated frame, but nonetheless an absolute powerhouse. there is little that can survive Mag's bubble of doom, and even with a mediocre setup, she can still reach 1 million plus damage. Not many frames can say the same. This concludes the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.